Well, hi, welcome to episode number 3 of Lean Coffee Talk. I'm Mark Graban, joined by
Jamie Flinchbaugh. Good morning.
Good morning. This may end up being a super caffeinated episode of Lean Coffee Talk. We'll get into the reason for that maybe in a minute.
It may be.
How much coffee have you already had this morning?
None. I saved myself for this. I thought that wise.
Yeah, I did have one espresso when I first got up and kind of get the day started. And this I'll be probably not too wired by the end of the episode. We shall see, though. This is a bit of a new coffee experiment today. We're going to talk about that theme in a minute, but we're going to kick things off. We're going to do we can call this segment blatant plugs. We're going to talk about the other podcasts that we have going on, a recent guest that we think was interesting. Jamie, why don't you go first?
Yeah. So, I didn't know we were calling it, plug. But,
I don't know.
I am making it up, but yeah, my podcast is People Solve Problems. I just do it twice a month, so it's not that frequent. And I've been doing it for a little while now, but I'm going to go back actually to January, just because I had Pete Ruggiero, who's the CEO of Crayola, long time friend and collaborator in many ways. And he was really talking about how he leads with perpetual optimism, which when you combine it with problem solving is, perpetual optimism minus problem solving can be toxic. Perpetual optimism plus problem solving can be extremely powerful. And he's done great things at Crayola, and I love working with him. So it was a great episode for me, at least. And I think others have gotten a lot out of it as well. So.
Yeah, well, it's great that you were. I mean, that's impressive to have the CEO of a company like Crayola on the podcast. And I'll have to go find that episode. That one, I missed that one. And I think it's interesting to frame problem solving as an optimistic or a positive pursuit. Like some environments like to get upset with, they do get upset with people about you're being negative, you're pointing out all these problems. And I've always thought in terms of like, well, I'm pointing out that these are solvable. I think it's positive to make things better. But
yep,
you know how that goes sometimes.
But it's all framed in the power of what we can achieve is I think even better. And that's I think what Pete does so well as a leader. So
wow.
So how about you?
I recently did, I'll go back real quickly to last fall. It was right about when the NFL season was starting, and I had an opportunity to interview Dr. Thom Mayer. He's the medical director of the NFL Players Association, so the Players Union, and had a great conversation about things, including some of the planned changes, in the goal of reducing concussions, especially on kickoffs. And the NFL was putting in place a new format for the kickoff that was meant to avoid players running 60 yards and smashing into each other head first. It took some getting used to. They called it the dynamic kickoff, which was maybe kind of a optimistic, positive name. But they were trying to get more kickoff returns and have fewer head injuries at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I reached out to Dr. Mayer and got him to come back to kind of close the loop a little bit. And he really appreciated the framing of, well, how did that experiment play out? And there was good news. So there was like a 43% reduction in concussion rates on kickoff plays. Yeah. And there was like a 50% increase in the number of kicks returned instead of just a boring touchback that
right.
Not that interesting to watch. So it was fun closing the loop with him on that and kind of talking about future experiments, kind of trying to continue improving helmet technology and other rules changes. And, I thought it was interesting because we talked about, they have a goal of 0 concussions. And we're talking about, parallels to goals of 0 harm for employees in a factory, 0 harm to patients. And he said, well, the injury rate in the NFL is 100%. But what we're trying to avoid is, the catastrophic head injuries and things that could really permanently affect your life. So really enjoyed that conversation with him. And I learned, and I think I'm going to get him back on my Lean podcast, Lean blog interviews, because he's a fan of Dr. Deming. He knows of Don Berwick. He knows about Kaizen. He had actually read my book, Healthcare Kaizen. So there's another shameless plug. So we're going to talk about the broader work he's done around leadership and quality improvement, and fascinating guy.
Yeah, that's neat. I think it's interesting when you're, a doctor for an organization, whatever that might be, whether you're in the military or you're in the NFL or whatever that might be, versus just a doctor on the outside, because your decisions are contextual. They are in the context of doing the business, doing the work. And you have to be, rather than just leave it to the patient, as a doctor, you're now starting to weigh in the contextual environment and what all's going on. There's the movie with Jamie Foxx where, the doctor was unethical. I forget.
Is that Any Given Sunday?
Any Given Sunday, that's what it was. Yeah. So in that environment, it's kind of like the difference between an external lawyer and a general counsel. Like you're still a lawyer, but you're in the business and you're helping run the business versus just sit on the outside and weigh in. So I think it's an interesting role to play, and certainly he understands it's not, yes, it's about head injuries, but they also have a product to put on the field. So.
Yeah, I mean, the only way to completely eliminate football injuries would be to eliminate football.
Right.
But I think the NFL has done things, including, I think, having independent medical professionals and physicians making decisions about concussions and when players need to be kept out, because you can't have the conflict of interest of a doctor employed by the team. The team has the incentive and the player has the incentive to want to go back in the game. You need some independent standard to say, no, we're taking your helmet away. You can't go back in.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
So we'll have links to those episodes in the show notes, and hope people will check that out. You want to talk about our coffee theme for today?
Yeah. So we're gonna talk about the famous red eye, and also its big brother, the black eye, apparently.
So a red eye is this is the first time I'm ever drinking one. That's where you have typically a brewed cup of coffee with an espresso shot dumped in.
Right. So you take your coffee. So you go to the coffee shop. Usually, it's where a lot of it's done, because they're for a lot of us at home, we're only brewing one drink. We're not running a cafe or a bar. But you go in, you get your usually a drip coffee, and then they dump in a shot of espresso, and it's a red eye. And the name is pretty self-explanatory in the sense you're waking up with red eyes because you're super tired, you didn't get a lot of sleep, and you need the extra boost of caffeine. So that's the intent, which is a little interesting, because the shot of espresso you put in has less caffeine than the cup of coffee does.
Right.
And that's the perception about espresso. Espresso doesn't have more caffeine per ounce, but not more caffeine than a regular coffee. But you're still, because it's low ounces, you're still kind of doubling up the caffeine just about.
It's definitely a boost. It's a flavor boost. I'm noticing from drinking one here. Is this something you sometimes do? If you're
I have to say, I'd be more likely to do a long black or Americano than an actual red eye. And I think, in the past, I probably would have been inclined. I know I've had one. I think, if nothing else, out of curiosity. But also, you go to a coffee shop and it's like, well, I'm also a cheap SOB. So it's like, oh, you're just going to, plus up me on the expenses if I start putting additives in. But yeah, not a regular thing for me. But I think a lot of it comes down to is coffee a caffeine delivery vehicle, or is it something you enjoy, right?
Or both.
Or both, right? Or both. And it's one of the reasons you mentioned, I didn't, this is my first coffee. I don't anymore wake up and have a coffee right away.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to have a coffee, not late morning, but more mid morning. That's kind of my target range. So I'm not using it to wake up. I'm using it, maybe it's a boost at that point, but it's also, again, it's there for the enjoyment.
Yeah. I mean, there's also ritual and routine. The habit of the first, it was the old Folgers jingle. The first part of the first part of waking up, or the best part of waking up is
best
Folgers
part of waking up. It's Folgers in your cup.
It could be the first part, but yeah. So, and there's some science that suggests you shouldn't have coffee right away, because if you're waking up tired, that could, that's different, different type of problem. But they say drinking coffee boosts your cortisol levels, and when you first wake up, that's part of how you wake up. Your body naturally boosts cortisol levels, and there's some science that says you should wait 60 or 90 minutes, part of your circadian rhythm, and use caffeine if you want like a mid-morning boost.
Right, and so we won't get too deep in the science.
That's about all I know about the science. So I
right,
can't go.
And that's not like a double-blind study. That's just sort of some of what we know is happening. But and there's coffee machines that you set an alarm on the coffee machine, so it starts brewing before you even wake up. But yeah, the red eye is sort of famous for caffeine fans. They want the extra caffeine, get the most out of their cup. And so there's some extreme versions of that. You had shared with me the I guess really what is called the black eye, which is what Dan Campbell does. Now you're
back to football, head coach of the Detroit Lions.
And for those who haven't, I do know who he is, which is rare because I'm not a football guy, but. Google a picture of him, and you'll see a guy where he if he could mainline this, he very well might. But
it's a tough looking guy. He played football in the NFL. He was a tight end.
Yeah, and he's maintained his fitness and all that other stuff. But he does. So he does 2 20-ounce Pike Place medium roast coffees, which medium roast, of course, is for Starbucks is like for anybody else.
Right.
It's disgusting in but 2 20-ounce Pike Place medium roast coffees with 2 shots of espresso in each one.
Yeah. So 20 ounce, the quote unquote venti, 2 of those. I mean, I don't know if he walks out with them. Like, one would be cold by the time he could.
Yeah, unless he's pounding them, unless he's really drinking them fast, one would be cold. Maybe he doesn't care. Maybe he drinks it all pretty quickly.
But it's there's an article in The Athletic, so a good sports website that's part of the New York Times, and they have a new section of The Athletic that's focused on leadership profiles and leadership concepts in sports, and so this was kind of considered in that category. But yeah, the writer said, "I'm going to drink coffee like Dan Campbell." He was a little terrified to do it, I think, but it's said to be over 1,400 milligrams of caffeine combined altogether. And I did the lookup, and the 20-ounce coffee is said to have 400 milligrams of caffeine each, just the coffee, and then a shot of espresso is I think roughly 70 milligrams, or so the math probably adds up. I'm not going to double check their math, but that's a lot of caffeine. Even just the 20-ounce coffee, 400 milligrams. The Mayo Clinic says that 400 milligrams of caffeine appears to be safe for most healthy adults. So he's well over triple. it's not exactly, I don't think there's a recommended limit, but at least that's Mayo Clinic guidance anyway.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's safe, unsafe. Again, everybody's different.
Yeah.
We don't know what else, is happening around this, how many things are already in his system. I mean, I definitely notice if I drink too much coffee and haven't had enough water, I'll notice it versus having had enough water. Just because it helps get it through the system a little faster. But as we already mentioned, football isn't an inherently safe thing. So if you went through life doing nothing unsafe, and this is one of the things he chooses to do. Like I said, he's fit in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I'd imagine some of the stress and the adrenaline that runs through his body probably outweighs the caffeine impact. But
he looks like a guy who hydrates. Like, he seems like the kind of guy that carries around one of these big round gallon-sized things of water that he's guzzling as well.
Yep. So to each their own. We're not advocating the black eye. Red eye, probably not a great habit, but not a bad way. Again, if you're if you want just and I think what you noted is important. It does change the flavor, right? Because espresso, you get more of the oils, you get more of the good stuff, in my opinion. It's why I usually drink espresso. So you take a coffee, and some people are like, "Oh, I don't like coffee, so let me juice it up with cream and sugar." Well, juice it up with espresso, and and it changes the flavor. And I think that's worth noting and worth trying.
Yeah, if you're the coffee drinker who doesn't really like coffee, this wouldn't help. That's why I think a lot of milk, cream, and sugar that's helping be the caffeine delivery system.
Right.
I like the flavor of most coffees. This, I don't know if I'll finish the cup. Like, it's certainly a richer flavor. I mean, I'd say it's about halfway between espresso and a brewed coffee or Americano. Yeah, because it's combined. So yeah, kind of in the middle of it doesn't taste like a big espresso. Oh my gosh, I said espresso. That's a pet peeve of mine. I know.
Well, to pretend you're in France, it's okay. So, I actually used for my coffee, I used some of my wife's beans because I was getting very low. And so I used my beans for my espresso, but I used her beans for my cup of coffee, and I'm noting very clearly that they're a bit stale. So,
using different beans, that's going to incorporate some different flavors,
right? Which is a good thing. There's not to get too sidetracked, but there's actually coffee connoisseurs now who are doing layered espresso with different beans packed in for layered. But my wife is putting in, she's making cappuccinos and probably doesn't know if it's stale or not. So
the milk might mask the staleness.
It masks a lot. That's why Starbucks gets away with it so well. So nobody's going in there for an espresso. So to the red eye, not won't be my standard, but not against it either. Yeah.
All right. So we're going to bounce around some different topics here today, sort of lean coffee style. We don't set a timer. We're not voting, but we put together a plan of some different topics we're going to touch on. And one is sort of going back to a topic from the last episode, from episode 2, where we talked about a survey that said, in general, people think it's great to have more manufacturing jobs in America, but the percentage of people who want to work in manufacturing themselves is very low.
Right.
So there's a conundrum. I saw an article, and this will be in the show notes, from NPR. The headline was, "Why aren't Americans filling the manufacturing jobs we already have?" So this is less of the theoretical, what if there were more factories and what if we could employ more people in manufacturing, that there's a challenge now that Bureau of Labor Statistics says there's nearly 500,000 open manufacturing jobs right now. And I don't think it was specific enough of, are these CNC machinist jobs, or these more entry-level assembly jobs, or these accounting jobs in a manufacturing company? But still, I mean, we hear the challenges and different things companies do to try to help build a workforce in their community, in different ways. But there seems to be these unfilled jobs already. So what's your reaction to that data?
Yeah. So first, I think we have to realize, and I don't remember seeing this in the article. I might want to go back and check again, but one of the problems about U.S. statistics in general is that they aren't regionalized, and we're a big country, right?
Yeah.
And so, are the people that want those jobs not where the jobs are? And that's a real problem. And we like to pretend, and for a long time we had, or in longer time frames, we have a mobile workforce, ones that can shift regions. But in shorter time frames, and I think decreasingly so, people don't want to move just so they can go get a job. So that's part of the problem. A lot of the manufacturing jobs that were lost are in places that people aren't going to go build a new one. So and so that's one. I think two, the idea of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. There has been a great increase in construction for manufacturing. But that goes back to 2020. That's when it started. It's not a 2025 trend. It's a
CHIPS Act and other things that were happening.
Some of it was incentives, some of it was supply chain disruptions, and some of it was just the increased cost of transportation and even environmental impact. So increased costs in China. There was all sorts of factors that were driving that. But I think one of the lesser talked about things, because we talk about it in net, isn't just manufacturing jobs or not manufacturing jobs. Most manufacturing jobs, especially in the U.S., highly capitalized equipment. That's the kind of stuff we're going to do better at. But you need to run that 3 shifts, if not 7 days. And so what I've working with my own clients is getting second, third shift. Getting weekend work, that's the harder part. Right? So day shift, they can fill the jobs. They sometimes struggle, but they can fill the jobs for day shift. But night shift, afternoon shift, night shift, or 12-hour shift, whatever that might be, those off shifts are the problem. So even when within the last week, the proposal for a tax plan came out, and talk about making overtime tax-free. And my immediate thought that just popped in my head was, what about shift premiums? Right? Like we often pay shift premiums 5, 10, 15% sometimes, and that probably has to go up. Shift premiums for people working those off shifts, make that, if we want to incentivize, make that tax-free.
That could help in healthcare as well.
That could absolutely help in healthcare, because they have the same problem. They need 24 coverage, and you want, you can't staff up your night shift with just your least experienced people that don't have a choice, right? So you need some of your experienced people there too, and you need that balance. So so in the end, right, we've seen a lot of deep analysis on, we want, for supply chain, for economic reasons, for all sorts of reasons, for national security, we want more manufacturing in the United States. But a lot of it will not be job heavy, will not be labor intensive. And we know that because, even before some of the factories left, the percentage of the labor force that did manufacturing work was going down.
The trends toward automation, and instead of assembling parts, you need people who can program robots,
right?
Maintain robots and other automation.
And these are areas that we're woefully behind where we should be, and B, a solvable problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That we need to be after. So, so pay attention. I think it's not just the net statistics, how many manufacturing plants, how many manufacturing jobs, but also what types of jobs, what types of factories, and where are they located. The nuance and the details in the data is where a lot of the story needs to be told.
Yeah. And there were some recommendations when we talk about a solvable problem. What are some countermeasures? There were some, I think it was a couple different economists who said basically, yeah, you need to pay more. Somebody even referred to so-called labor shortages. Like, yeah, it's a lack of people willing to do this work at a certain wage. You could pay more. Now that makes the economics of everything different. You've got to have higher productivity to offset higher wages. And then I think there's a deeper issue, maybe harder to solve. Somebody referred to manufacturing having a public relations problem or perception that manufacturing jobs are seen as dirty or unsafe or monotonous. And it's hard to generalize. Like, sure, there are unfortunately some manufacturing jobs like that. But I think people culturally think of, these happen to be cartoon characters, but, Fred Flintstone, Peter Griffin from Family Guy worked at a factory at one point, Homer Simpson in a nuclear plant. But, blue collar type jobs are not like glorified. We're not celebrating the creativity and the problem solving and the fancy clean room environments of some new manufacturing settings.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And the esprit de corps, not to mention, I still remember my times walking the factory floor. I developed friendships with folks because I was with them every day, on the floor. So, there's a PR problem. The pay relative to a lot of service jobs is in many cases much better, especially for the skilled side. And this is where the real problem lies, is that on the skilled side, we don't have, it takes a while to build the skills. And there we have a gap.
So there'll be a link to that article in the show notes. So we're gonna, there's so many new books being published in the realm of lean. We could probably highlight a book or two every episode, but there's two books, one that's out now, one that's coming soon that we're going to at least mention here. One is a book called The Problem Solver's Toolkit, a surprisingly simple guide to your Lean Six Sigma journey. This is the second edition of a book by our friends Elizabeth Swan and Tracy O'Rourke. They both joined us in an episode of Lean Whiskey.
Yep, and we're talking about a future episode of this as well. Where they'll join us. So I think it's pretty cool. You've done this kind of thing before, but you're doing a LinkedIn Live. I don't know if it's a launch party or just
yeah, it's a launch party. Like right now, the book's in pre-order status. By June 12th, the book should be available.
Okay,
is so the plan. So yeah, we're going to do a kind of an online event.
Great. So great for you to do that. Part of Mark's continued service to the Lean community, doing the book launch party, and so we'll see how that book does, and see how folks enjoy it, and we'll get to talk about it in the future as well. And then the other book, we're actually both going to have Mark Reich as a guest on our separate podcasts, which is interesting. We don't do that. We end up doing that. It's not always synced up. Certainly not like we're planning it, but and quite frankly, you're almost always ahead of me on the scheduling because you're just on top of this stuff, and this will be another one. But the book is Managing on Purpose by Mark Reich.
Yeah, the subtitle is Using Hoshin Kanri to Develop Strategy, Align Teams, Grow Leaders, and Innovate Your Enterprise. So I don't know Mark Reich that well. I know he was former Toyota, and he's been with the Lean Enterprise Institute for a while. But in starting to read the book and reading his bio, he was the former Toyota North America Hoshin Kanri leader. And I think, the book goes through, well, what's involved in the role of a hoshin kanri leader. So, I think he's writing from his direct experience at Toyota, not as an academic. No offense to academics, but
Right.
he's a practitioner from the inside. There's value, I think, from all those different perspectives. But then his perspectives of bringing hoshin kanri into a lot of non-Toyota organizations, which is frankly, that's a challenge we're facing. We're not trying to run Toyota the way Toyota did hoshin kanri. We're trying to undo some of the old habits of our organizations and develop some new ones and not just directly copy Toyota. So I think Mark has interesting perspectives.
Yeah, and hoshin kanri is, I think has its own interesting history because, while Toyota certainly learned from Ford and had all, and grocery stores, and we don't want to recap all that history, but and on the tool and method side, a lot of what they did, they kind of developed and iterated and evolved in-house, maybe inspired by other ideas, but built. But hoshin kanri is not one of those, right? So it was a practice, sort of taught to Toyota, but they adopted it because they saw the consistency with lean. And I always think that's interesting. What are things that weren't born out of lean but are highly consistent with lean?
Yeah.
And hoshin kanri for me is one because it's a systems thinking tool. It's about the interconnectedness of things, right? So we can do OKRs and other strategy methods that are more linear, they're more objective and, action plan. And hoshin kanri is about more interconnectedness. I think books from, Toyota alumni, there's a lot of them now. And they can go either way. They can either just, here's what we did, here's what we do at Toyota, which I think is often fairly uninteresting because there's other stuff out there that covers that probably better. But when you expand on the experience and okay, here's my experience, make it more personal. I think that goes a much further distance from a contribution. So we'll both have Mark on as guests. And like I said, here's if you really want to get caught up on what the book has to say, listen to Mark's episode first because it'll be out well before mine.
Yeah, I think the episode with Mark will be available next month. Yeah. So we've got a date scheduled for the recording, and we'll get that out there. And again, that book's available now through LEI, which is lean.org. It's available through Amazon. It's a pretty hefty workbook, spiral bound, format as LEI often does. So
yep, and I just tends to go against my heavy Kindle use often. Yeah. So although I have been reading more. For various reasons, I've been reading more physical book copies, and partly because either people have sent them to me or I've been reading them in order to then hand them off to somebody else. But I still love my Kindle. So.
Yeah. All right. So next topic, we probably a couple more topics here today. So there was a quote. I saw a bunch of people sharing it on threads, social media. I don't know. It's probably one of these things that somebody said, and then a lot of people copy paste. And so
yeah. I mean, it's not like everybody had the same original thought independently.
Right. But related to the election of the new Pope Leo XIV, there's a quote here that said, "It only took 2 days to choose the new Pope. Your startup's remote hire doesn't need 5 rounds of interviews." No, I think, well, I mean, I don't know if it's a fair comparison. Like these cardinals all know each other, I think, already. They're not new to the organization, if you will.
Yeah, I think yes and no. They're not new to the organization, that's for certain. They don't spend a lot of time with each other.
That's true. They're from all around the world.
They're spread out all over the world. But
they know of each other, maybe.
They know of each other. There's a lot of background. And, I mean, obviously, we've known of this event coming for years. I just didn't know when, but once it comes, for those that watch Conclave, it's, hey, have you picked out your Pope name? And it's like, oh no, I haven't. It's like, sure you have. Every cardinal has.
They all think about it.
Every year, like, what would my Pope name be? So there's plenty of time to think about it leading up to that point, and it's not really an interview process, right? It's just voting at this point, really, fundamentally. There's coffee talk and side conversations, and as you learn a little about the process, you kind of wonder if there shouldn't be more floor debates and things around it versus just side coffee conversations and then voting. But yeah, so I'm not sure it's a fair comparison. But at the same time, there is a bit of, are we looking, when we're interviewing people, are we looking in their interview process too hard? Are we looking for red flags? Are we just not able to make a decision? Do we feel that we're really increasing our information intake by doing more rounds of interviews? And in many cases, the answer is no, right? We're giving ourselves false confidence that another round is more information.
There could be diminishing returns.
There's definitely diminishing returns unless we're looking for reasons not to hire them, right? There's the whole grass is greener. And so, the candidate is fresh. I don't know, to quote Toby from the West Wing, you're going to have some qualities that annoy me. I just don't know what they are yet. So I just don't know what your problems are yet, but let me keep interviewing until I find out what they are. But that's where I think, are we looking for a reason not to hire somebody? Or are we just not confident in our ability to pull the trigger?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, thinking of a hiring process and different businesses, applying lean thinking to try to eliminate waste and delays in a way that doesn't just cut corners, right? So we'd want, as with all things, like better flow in the hiring process, because I think time to offer, if you will, like being able to do that more quickly is a competitive advantage. Because I've heard stories of a company makes an offer, and because they move slower than another company,
right,
they lose out on the candidate. So some of that depends on the circumstances of it. Is it a employer's market or an employee's market? When you're really competing hard for talent, there's probably even more incentive then to have a more efficient, but also like a better hiring process. Not just faster. We're going to say, well, we're going to panic and only do one interview, and that might be cutting corners.
Yeah, and I think that especially lately, as the pendulum swings from employer's market to employee's market faster, there's something about your reputation, right, as a company, and you develop a reputation for being fair and purposeful and thoughtful in your interviewing process. So I think it's there's something to be said for, is it another interview or is it something different, right? And okay, we've done our interviews, that part's done. Now let's let's bring them in for a group discussion. Let's bring them in for skills testing, which is on the rise, because companies are more like, well, we care about your skills more than we care about your personality. And that's fair, right? So let's test for that. Let's give tests, which again, is both fair but also flawed, because that's not a measure of their success over a longer period of time. So the question is it just another conversation with the same old questions and more people? And I think I was actually for a nonprofit I was involved in. the folks running the org were doing an important interview, and I was going to be on the interview list, and they basically found the candidate they thought they wanted to hire, and then they were like, well, okay, well, Jamie's got to do an interview, and like, but wait, we basically decided this is the person we want, so why waste Jamie's time or the candidate's time with an interview? We've already really made the decision. It's really just a formality to do these other interviews. Let's just cancel them. I was like, great. I don't need to feel included, right? If,
Right.
if you've made your decision, you know they're the right person, then go. Yeah, make the decision and go forward.
If it doesn't serve the company or serve the candidate, then that's a step that could be eliminated.
Right.
You're not offended by that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, again, sometimes people are looking, especially if they have multiple candidates, they're looking to split hairs on decisions. But I actually did a video on this, not about interviews, but just around, you have two options or maybe more, and you can't decide. And there's basically, the first thing is, well, what's the information I need, and what's my plan to go get it? And if you can't define that plan, then you're just searching. You're just looking. And the reason you're looking is that one of two things. Either you have two great options, and the information to tell the difference between the two of them is after the fact. Mm-hmm. It's unattainable information. So in that case, just pick one, right? Yeah. You can't find the difference because the information that really matters is afterwards. Or you have two options and you just don't like either one. Mm-hmm. And you can't decide because you're like, yeah, I'm not thrilled with that. I'm not thrilled with that. Why can't I decide? Well, start over maybe, right?
And for all the companies that talk about meritocracy and hiring the best candidate, like, is there really such a definitively best, like that's an outlier, or are they all part of the same range of people that would probably, essentially be equally good?
Yeah.
I think our ability to determine, quote unquote, the best is often overstated.
And that's the key, I think. Our ability to figure that out in advance of hiring them is very limited. Mm-hmm. At best, we're going to have 10% of the information we need. And so no matter what you do, you are always taking a chance. So you're not trying to change yourself from 60% confidence to 90% confidence. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Based on the information that's actually available, you're trying to increase your chances from 10% of the information to 11% of the information, right? Because most of the information comes afterwards, right? Yeah. And again, most people that even get to that point are qualified, are good people. They deserve the work, and the information about whether they're going to flop is not available to you in advance.
Mm-hmm. And if you've made a hiring mistake, that can be painful for everyone involved, but that could be corrected. I mean, there's a lot of people who say hire slowly, fire quickly. But I don't think slowly is really the goal, especially if there's a lot of waste in the process. You might say hire carefully.
I think, carefully is good. I think thoughtfully is good. I mean, you're asking somebody to leave a job, and so just out of fairness and respect, and maybe they're already, they've already left a job, and but still, you're asking them to leave the job market and join you. And so you shouldn't do it on a whim. You should be thoughtful in the process. Yeah. But again, thoughtful includes that. Well, what are we doing here? Are we overdoing it? Do we, are we searching for red flags that we're not going to find? Right. So, So again, ask yourself those questions as you're going along. Be thoughtful, be deliberate. But if you're going to do more work on the interview process, make sure it's adding new information and not just more work.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay, we'll move on and talk about the online event that we registered for and tried to watch and struggled to watch and kind of eventually did. Jamie had told me about, I don't know if I got the email from MIT Sloan, we're talking about our grad school alma mater here. There was an online event last week. It was called the MIT Sloan Management Review Work 25 conference. It was supposed to be about 4 hours. We were going to sit and watch it and talk about at least some of it here in Lean Coffee Talk. It got off to, shall we say, a rocky start.
Yeah, and I was, I kind of signed up because I like the idea of, first of all, the topic's interesting, the future of work, and I kind of, I'll say, trust MIT enough to curate the content well, and of course, we both graduated from there, so there's that. So I'm like, all right, it's worth it every once in a while. I'd rather go do this in person, but I'm not going to Boston for 4.5 hours, so great opportunity just to take a big chunk of time, sit down and learn.
Yeah, and it was relatively inexpensive. It wasn't free.
It wasn't free, right? And I'm glad for that. Like, I do plenty of free webinars, right, or member-based webinars. Like, I attend a lot of National Association of Corporate Directors conferences or webinars, and they're free to me as a member. But yeah, it wasn't free, but it wasn't expensive. So there was, even when I signed up, I'm like, there was a chance I was going to have to, be unavailable all day, and it's worth a chance. I'll just go ahead and sign up. But
and knowing recordings are almost always available for these things.
Yeah, and I kind of know myself that I'm like, I'm probably not going to get to the recordings. I blocked off the time. That's when I'm going to watch them for the conference. Will I get to the recordings afterwards? Yeah, less likely. It just is. I'd have to put it back on my calendar. So being live, that kind of helps for me, just because I saw my schedule and I'm there. But so off we start. I had everything prepared. I had my room set up for how I wanted to be comfortable sitting back and taking notes and watching it up on the wall. And
I was streaming it through TV as opposed to my laptop. And
Yep. So all ready to go, and I'm looking around. I'm looking at the emails that say, "Here you go," and it just kept bringing me to a landing page where the same landing page I've had the whole time, with nothing changed from an hour before, a day before, or weeks before. It was the same landing page with no information about how to get into the conference.
Because the emails, the reminder emails, I think it quite literally said, "Click here to join."
Yeah, click here. Yeah, click here for the event or whatever that was, and I clicked there and just keep going back in circles, back to the same event and same event page with nothing new. And I'm getting frustrated. I did the mother of all desperate attempts. I restarted my computer.
I tried a different browser. I double checked the time zone.
Tried a different computer. Texted you at some point. I can't remember when, but I was definitely like, "Am I stupid? Right? Am I
making a mistake?
Yeah. Am I just like, I'm just missing something? It's right in front of my eyes, and I'm missing it." And this went on for 25 minutes.
And I had emailed the email address for the event. It's if you need technical support, and I wrote back and got like an auto reply. I'm like, that's not encouraging, and I'm sure they were overloaded with emails.
Yeah, the auto reply said 24 to 48 hour response. I'm like, that's not going to help. I had done that twice, and I was getting pretty frustrated, right? So what was most frustrating at that point was it had to be me, because there was no email out from the conference organizers that there was anything wrong.
Yeah, not even an acknowledgement of oops, and something went wrong, and we're trying to figure it out, and we will let you know. They weren't being proactive.
The information even said the waiting room will open 15 minutes before the conference starts.
Yeah.
So like that, at this point, it would have been, almost 45 minutes in since they've opened the waiting room. So if they had a problem, clearly they would have emailed people.
You almost need to have that just teed up and ready to go in case something goes wrong. I don't do that with the live webinars that I do for KaiNexus or the LinkedIn lives, but those are all free. Like for me, I think my expectations were much higher because I had paid something. If I had paid $2 or like something about like, okay, some money exchanged hands, I expect this to be run in a really professional way, as opposed to like things go wrong. People make mistakes. There are tech challenges. I'm much more willing to be kind about that, I think, than if it's a free thing.
Yep.
But this should have been a much more buttoned up, professional event in terms of even just the backup plan.
Yeah.
Didn't seem to be there. And when they finally went live, didn't they say like, well, our first speaker had some technical challenges, which doesn't explain, like if they were having internet problem, why they couldn't have started the event, even just to say, look, our first speaker's internet is down. Or I
don't think
get a clear sense of what had gone wrong.
And I don't think it was the first speaker couldn't join, and that's why they didn't start the conference. It was, so it's one thing if you have problems, right? And forget that it's the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and they should get the technology right, but having problems is one thing. The lack of communication was quite frankly pathetic, just inexcusable. But then what really aggravated me was they kind of kept saying, well, some people had problems. And if that was the case, they would have been doing, the conference would have been live for many people.
Yeah.
But it didn't, I believe everybody was locked out. It certainly seemed like it was everybody based on the chat. And so they really downplayed their mistake, like it wasn't that big a deal. Like,
right.
And I was one click away from just giving up and moving on with my day.
Yeah, I was irritated by it. I was frustrated by it. And it's not even so much the technology in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but it's the MIT Sloan School of Management, which includes marketing and communications and customer service. And I think they kind of dropped the ball on some of that. And then, they even trying to go to find the recordings, the page, and there wasn't even something clearly communicating when the recordings would be available. Again, I thought I was missing it, or now I'm expecting the worst. I'm like, oh, they've also botched the setup of the page with the recordings. And so I emailed them and said, where do I find the recordings? And they wrote back and said, oh, well, it takes time to process and blah, blah, blah. And
it
doesn't really take that long. I would have expected 24 to 48 hours to have those recordings available, and we'll email you when they're ready. And I think it's now been a week.
Yeah, there's no reason for that other than they just didn't prioritize the work, didn't plan for it. So yeah, I'd have to say, and I'll say this on the speaker side as well, just while we're issuing complaints. We're not here to vent. We are here to vent.
We're going to talk about the content a little bit. But.
We will talk about the content, but if it's a paid conference, you don't dial in as a speaker without knowing that you have good internet. If it's a webinar and you're squeezing it in on a road trip and, fine, like maybe your internet and your hotel doesn't work great, but it's a paid, I know the speakers aren't paid, but still, it's a paid conference. There's some expectations, but this fundamentally is a lesson of things can go wrong, but how you behave, how you make decisions, how you operate when things go wrong, says everything about how you operate. And there's lessons to be learned. This is kind of why we're talking about it. Whether you're doing a webinar, whether you're hosting a group, whether you're running a conference, whether you're running a meeting, when things go wrong, how quickly, thoroughly, and thoughtfully Do you respond in that moment? And this was a failure that hurt the brand. What's I got just this week my envelope for because I've given some fairly hefty gifts to MIT in the past, and I got the leadership gift request from MIT. I'm like, that's bad timing. You're certainly
right.
certainly
Well, you give them some money, they're always going to ask for more.
Yeah. And so lessons to be learned for everybody, and hopefully they do. But they didn't act like they were going to learn lessons from this. That's what really bugged me.
Yeah. When you think about service recovery, I mean, this is old. I think even like 30 years ago, when GM was doing the early days of the Saturn experiment, a different kind of car company. And yes, you want to build a high quality car. Things go wrong with cars, so you want to provide a really good service experience. I think that was one of the things Saturn was trying to do, and their customer satisfaction was higher for customers that had a problem with their vehicle but then got it resolved well. Those customers were happier than the customers that never had a problem with their vehicle.
Yeah.
And that says something, right? You shouldn't aspire to go creating defects intentionally so that you can fix them well, but defects happen even with the best made automobiles.
And there's been research, and this research predates social media, and that's important because a bad experience for one person that's not amplified and captured for the world is different, right? So if you've captured your bad experience and marked it down on Yelp or Reddit or wherever else in perpetuity, that's a big impact. But again, predating social media experiences on banks and airlines, if you made a mistake but then corrected it, the brand loyalty went up, right? And so again, maybe you don't fabricate mistakes, but your brand loyalty went up if you respond well to a mistake. And again, those mistakes weren't captured in social media forever, and in Google reviews, and you got your 1-star review. But nevertheless, that how you respond matters. And so I'm not going to say don't try to be mistake free, but assume that even if you try to be mistake free, you won't be. And be just as thoughtful about how you react, you recover, you respond when things go wrong. That's important.
Don't make a customer service mistake on top of a process mistake. Or I mean, I tell a real quick story. My wife and I and her parents were in Paso Robles, California. There's an area called Tin City, which is sort of like a startup business park of small wineries, and they're all within walking distance of each other. So it's not like, big vineyards, but it's, pretty much just like production facilities. So recommend Tin City highly. And there was a couple of options for food. So there was a food truck, and we had time in between winery appointments, and there was no line to order food, right? So that's encouraging. So what's your expectation if you're ordering sandwiches or something out of a food truck and you had one person ahead of you and then you order? How long would you expect it would take to get your food made and delivered to you? What's your Jamie Flinchbaugh expectation?
Oh, I'm not even going to guess. I try not to, but let's
like 10 minutes.
Yeah, let's go for 20 minutes. Let's just assume you're busy. But
yeah, it was getting on almost an hour.
That's long.
Apparently, the bottleneck was not taking orders; they were doing that. So it was and I think there was also a perception thing where I've been at food trucks around MIT where you stand in line for 30 minutes to order the food, and then you get it very quickly. A lot of that is that the food is designed. It's been pre-cooked and it's just assembled into the falafel wrap or whatever it is that you're getting. This was apparently not designed for that, and it took like almost an hour. And they weren't real apologetic about it. Their attitude, I think, was bad, which made my attitude kind of bad. And then as we were leaving, there were some people waiting in line to order, and I made a bit of a cranky comment walking by, of, kind of loud enough for the food truck and the customers to hear, like, make sure you've got time to wait because they're really slow. So the owner of the truck came out of the truck and was very aggressively like chasing me down, like I'm trying to walk away. And he was like, well, hey, was the food good? Did you like quality takes time? Was the food, like, he was really super argumentative. And I'm like, I'm sorry, dude. Like,
Yeah, that's
sandwiches, like there's no, and so it just went from bad to worse. And I posted a 1-star review, and then they were being super attacking in response to the review. And I'm like, it's like, that could have been managed a lot better on their part. I would say, for one, it shouldn't take that long.
No.
Or two, you better set expectations and say, hey, do you have an hour to wait? We're not sitting down in a fine dining, leisurely European lunch here. It's a food truck. And then he got really, it was just badly handled.
Yeah, that's clearly they're triggered by that on a regular basis. So
there were other complaints about that. Unquestionably not learning.
Yeah, that's not why they're in the business. So
well, they're no longer in the business, because actually we thought about this the other day, because we were at a food truck that was very surprisingly efficient. And I tried looking them up, and I think they're out of business, which I don't gloat over. It's unfortunate, but
but maybe they learn and start the next one. It's that's do different, do better. But yeah, I still remember my there was a Chinese food truck at MIT campus, and it was always the longest line, and it was still the fastest service. And it was one of my standards when I was there as a student. $5 or something like that. And
just off you go. It out. The rice is cooked. All the stuff is cooked. We're just assembling to order.
Yep. So, but I missed that one. That was a great food truck.
The falafel truck. That's
that was on
back is a quite literal example.
I think the falafel truck was on Mass Ave. I remember. At least it was when I was there.
There was a side street off of Kendall Square. I forget the name of the street, but there were a couple food trucks, including the Chinese food truck, which I remember doing. But for being it was affordable for students. So.
Yeah, that was why they were there. Right?
Yeah. All right. So we intended to talk about the content.
Yeah, we can talk about the content of the conference. That was
so
they did have speakers. We did listen to them.
So there was the first speaker, Sharon Parker. And I think it's a really important topic, redesigning work to prevent burnout. And, I think the key on focus on redesigning the work instead of, trying to put people through resiliency training so that they can better deal with the waste and nonsense.
Yeah. And, work is hard and resilience is good. So I think that's all good, but again, we shouldn't make it harder than it needs to be. We shouldn't make it, more stressful than it needs to be. We shouldn't make it, we should remove barriers to or elements that lead to burnout when we can identify them and find them. So, the speaker who I can't remember what university they were almost all except for a sponsor, I think all academic speakers
from different universities,
some of which were MIT, and that was what I was expecting at an MIT hosted conference. But so their research led to a model which they called SMART.
If it was an MIT professor, it would be SMAT.
Yeah, wouldn't come up with a cool name, and I'm not sure. I think the SMART with relation to SMART goals is so overused. It's probably worth avoiding that acronym. But nevertheless, you come up with 5 things, and you get there. I'm sure they, like a lot of people, change some of the names, the wording, the work itself.
They force fit it.
So real quick, the acronym SMART stood for stimulating work, mastery of work, autonomy of work, relational, and then tolerable. So those are 5 ingredients which help redesign work to prevent burnout. That's part of the goal. And none of those elements by themselves are new. They're things we've all talked about in work design for quite a long time.
The same talk could have been given in the Future of Work 1995 conference. Like, it's all good and timeless. So
yeah, it's all good and timeless
with that. But yeah, I mean, but there were, I think, familiar thoughts. So, some of the notes I took under stimulating work, she emphasized not wasting talent, which is, clear connections to lean language. Under mastery, she talked about, that includes getting feedback, knowing how your job fits into the big picture. Dan Pink, in his book Drive, talked about mastery, and then the A in this framework, autonomy. Dan Pink also talked about. So autonomy, having influence over your work methods. Like, to me, that's a lean environment. That doesn't mean everyone gets to do what they want, but you have influence in standardized work. It's not a free-for-all. Relational is, she's emphasized being part of a team, the social connections, making a difference to others. And again, in Dan Pink's book, he emphasized purpose, right? So his model in the book Drive about intrinsic motivation was purpose, mastery, and autonomy. I'm pretty sure, I think that was,
I don't remember, but that sounds right.
It's directionally correct.
It's directionally correct for sure.
And then under tolerable, I mean, that basically, I think the lean word we would use is don't overburden people. Like, jobs have to be achievable, tolerable conditions. And we think of like all the reasons why nurses leave the profession. A lot of the complaints is that the workload and the expectations are not tolerable, which is a huge shame.
Right. Yeah. So maybe nothing new under the sun, but of course there's, like I wrote a book about problem solving. Problem solving is not new. I'm just trying to create new insights. So it's not a criticism of what they're presenting, that the ideas are found elsewhere. It's just the connections that we find in these things. Even if you go back to, Gallup's 12 questions that they ask in employee engagement surveys, you'll find elements of these in those 12 questions. So, is it more useful? Is it more integrative? Is it just a different way to remember it with different insights? All good. Like I said, not a criticism just because people present frameworks that have ideas that we've already talked about before. But, and it is, is burnout a bigger thing than it was in the past? I think there's certainly an argument, going back to the resilience point, is that it's not that jobs are harder than they used to be. It's not that the factors of work have increased to a point that changes what work was in the 90s, so to speak. But there is sort of less willingness to just have to endure it, and more awareness of the impact of those elements on actual work impact, right? On actual work performance, right? So as an individual, people take more accountability, responsibility, ownership over their mental health, their things like that, and so they're voicing their opinion more thoughtfully, more aggressively about what they need in that. But then also, I think both research and observation and thoughtfulness is helping us understand that, working people to burnout is not getting the most out of them. It's getting less out of them, because we're getting, especially as we get less into just labor effort, but actual thinking, performance, attentiveness, all these sorts of things. If we're not working people to burnout, we actually get more out of them. So even just purely objectively, purely selfishly, purely rationally, there's company benefits to working on these things in a thoughtful manner.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was, I think the other thing that stood out to me from her comments is maybe goes back to the PR problem that manufacturing has. She was talking about, I think she used the phrase menial jobs, and she was British. So she used the phrase like working in a rubbish dump. And she sounded almost dumbfounded. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but she sounded surprised that menial jobs can be fulfilling. Like, well, yes. I mean, like if the work design is done well, following the SMART model, it's not just for quote unquote knowledge work. It's not just the work, but again, and even you even mentioned earlier the esprit de corps, the relationships and all, like relatively repetitive work, and we can address that through job rotation, and that's part of the work design. But you can't generalize about manufacturing, factories, rubbish dumps. I don't think there's a rubbish dump on the best workplaces list.
Probably not.
They're probably not applying for that. But
probably not applying for it. Nobody's surveying them. So
there's some rubbish dump though where people are relatively happy because they might not be the most stimulating work, but they could have elements of mastery, autonomy, those relations, and work that's tolerable. So if it's not smart, it's mart. Maybe that's good enough.
Yeah, and these are not like all 5 elements or nothing, right? This is not a multiplication factor where one element's missing, the whole thing equation goes to 0. They're just things that move you in that right direction. And there's lots of roles out there where you don't work with any other people. You're just, you get in your truck, you go do your work, which might be out and about. You might not even interact with customers, let alone fellow employees. And then you go home, but you've gotten something out of that in that, and part of that is allowing for the factors that fit different people, different interests, different wants, and even if we can't design the work, every job comes with other elements other than performing the task, and we can certainly make sure, even if there's only so much we can do about the work itself, that the other elements that wrap around the work itself are moving in, the right direction versus the wrong direction.
Yeah. So that was definitely, I think, some good content. Do you want to talk about the one on mastery real quick?
Yeah. Let me make one more quick point. It's just around the word autonomy. Jan Klein, who was a big part of MIT when we were there, she would always talk about semi-autonomous. And the word autonomy can be dangerous because even CEOs don't have autonomy. Autonomy, as we define it, almost binary state, doesn't exist, right? And so it can be a dangerous word to use because people think, oh, I just stay out of my business. It's like, well, it's not your business, it's our business. And so it's semi-autonomous. But yeah, let's talk about the next speaker, who was Linda Grattan from the London Business School. And it certainly tied together. And this conference had AI topics and, union topics, and it was broader than these 2 topics, but it certainly ties in because the speech or the talk was why building mastery is critical to talent management. And mastery is a word we don't use often, but we certainly intersect with that word quite a bit.
I lost my notes. I don't have mastery of my
So mastery, and this was interesting because in a lot of regards, she was really talking about going deep, having sort of one element of your work that you really have mastery over, that you really go deep on. It's not necessarily about specialization, because we all, work in portfolios of different types of work or different types of activities, whether it's over our career or whatever that might be. But mastery, as she defined it, kind of was something we can hang our hat on, right? Mm-hmm. Not the word she used, but something that we can go back to. It's at the core, it's center. But I think a lot depends on how broadly you define something you have mastery around. So she gave the example of teaching. Like, I think that was one of hers. She might have said writing also, or maybe instead of, but I think she said her mastery was really around teaching and writing. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, is teaching, this is what's interesting, is, becomes interesting. It's like, is teaching a mastery, or is it teaching a specific concept? And those are two different things.
Because there's the knowledge that it takes to teach, and then there's the ability to teach and communicate effectively.
Right. And there's people, both universities and otherwise, that I know are just great teachers. You can give them a concept, and they can turn it into a teachable moment, and they can teach and engage, and they need to know enough, right? But they don't need to have mastery of the subject to be an excellent teacher. So they have mastery of teaching. And then there's others who are great teachers of a subject, but no others, right? And that's really that they've, that's a narrower definition or narrow mastery, because it's teaching that topic. And so I think one thing they didn't talk about enough is how, because they were talking about, well, if you have mastery, you can port that mastery to new career paths, right? And new options. But I do think it's really interesting, well, how broad or narrow is the thing you have mastery around?
I don't, the word mastery might be a bit of a stretch, but I don't know, let's think about podcasting. Like, I think if podcast, it's more of a hobby than a job, but let's say the ability to do podcasts at some point is a transferable skill to a different topic. Like, if you're curious and good at interviewing people and prepping and guiding a conversation, you could probably switch. I mean, you see TV commentators who switch from sports to news, and like, right. Okay, like, you have to be knowledgeable enough about each topic, and maybe some people couldn't make that transition. But if you have mastery of the profession of broadcasting,
right?
I'm thinking of others now here. That's a transferable skill.
Yep. And I think at the core of that becomes what I like to refer to as superpowers. Like, there's something that makes you special, right? So we all have gaps, and we should work on our gaps and close them. But you talk about somebody and go, what's their superpower? What are they really, really good at? And at some point, continuing to build on that, right? Not just, I've checked that box, I have that skill. Like, no, let me take that skill and double down on it.
Yeah.
Right? And take it even further and take it even deeper. And so sometimes, I've learned a skill. That's good enough. I've checked the box, and we stop. I think mastery is about, no, whatever that thing is, that superpower, that mastery, keep building it forever, because it becomes a linchpin, a leverage point, a foundation, pick your analogy, upon which to do, learn, or accomplish other things. Mm-hmm. So wasn't a lot of meat in the subject, but I think, again, interesting research behind it, and to support it, and I think a topic we can understand.
Yeah. Well, and then I think, it would be interesting to try to connect. I didn't have a chance to watch the session sessions on AI. So that's what made it a very 2025 topic, as opposed to 05 or whatever. But what skills is it, like what the mastery of what skills keep you more valuable and employable in a time of AI?
Yeah.
Try to have mastery of something that AI can't do well yet.
Yes, and there's a lot of advice out there on AI where Ethan Mollick is big on this: is don't use AI for things that you don't know enough about to judge whether AI gave you good or bad advice. Right? Or if it's low risk, that's fine, right? Oh, what restaurant should I go to? Low risk. But if it's important, don't use AI for things that you don't have enough knowledge to judge whether you're getting good outputs from it, which is interesting. But I would say, in a world of AI, critical thinking and problem solving remain super critical skills to interact with AI effectively, regardless of how you're using it. So, yeah, they had at least one AI speaker that we got to listen to, and then I guess two that we got to listen to, and then one that essentially never showed up, and they're gonna put it at a future date. So that was they were meant to be the opening speaker, and then they never worked that one out. So we'll see. Not sure why it isn't scheduled yet, but again, we won't rehash the conference problems.
Yeah. Well, thank you, MIT, for giving us some things to talk about.
Yeah, and where would things be without some red eye induced venting?
Yeah, and I got through about half of my red eye.
I'm through more.
A little bit went a long way.
I have just a little bit left, and I don't mind cold. I mind cold bad coffee. I don't mind cold good coffee.
Yeah.
So we're back to our cultural share to close out. Something we've read, watched, experienced, listened to, or tasted that we get to share. So why don't you? What do you have to share this episode?
Yeah, so it's something I'm looking forward to seeing based on some things I've watched before. So I've been a big fan of, and this is stuff people could watch now. It's all on Netflix. So big fan of Tim Robinson. So he did a show on Comedy Central called Detroiters. That was like a comedy series with Sam Richardson. As a kid who grew up around Detroit, especially like Tim Robinson did, Mort Krim from Channel 4 News, and they do parodies of a lot of these classic local commercials, which I don't know if probably still funny to people from outside of Detroit, but even more so if you've got connections to the area. But Detroiters was great. He did a really kind of a bonkers sketch comedy show called I Think You Should Leave on Netflix. So I think, you either love his style and approach or he's just not your thing. Like I tried showing an episode to my wife and like 5 minutes in, she's like, this guy's just yelling. I don't see what's funny about this. Like, have you seen either of these, Jamie?
I haven't seen either of those. To be honest, I had to look up Tim Robinson. Once I saw his face, I'm like, oh, he's familiar to me. But I can't remember what I've watched him in, but that's common for me.
Yeah, sure. Well, he was on Saturday Night Live for one season, which he didn't become a huge star, but there was a great sketch with Jason Sudeikis, who of course then later, Ted Lasso. And the whole setup is they're coming into NBC to pitch the famous NBA theme song called Round Ball Rock, which actually is going to be coming back in the fall. NBC is going to start doing the NBA again. But the original pitch is that it's John Tesh, played by Jason Sudeikis, who actually did write the music. And then his brother, played by Tim Anderson, is singing lyrics. And it's just like repetitive. It's like literally just like, basketball, give me the ball because I'm going to dunk it. And sorry for, his singing wasn't a lot better than that. And so the NBC executives are like, can we hear it again without the lyrics? And they both get really upset about like, hey, it's not the song without the lyrics. And it's just kind of absurdist. But the thing that I'm looking forward to, the movie will be in wide release May 23rd, is a film called Friendship, which starring Paul Rudd, which people probably more likely know Paul Rudd.
Right.
And it's, I think, in like the cringe comedy, awkward situations style of comedy of like, how hard it may, if there's any serious message, it's grounded in like how hard it can be for adult men to make new friends.
Okay.
This is about neighbors and they're trying to become friends and it goes sideways. And yeah.
Okay.
So
Well,
I'm looking forward to that.
I'll watch for that. And
Sorry, I gave you the whole career rundown of Tim Robinson. That might be the caffeine.
Yeah. And I might have to go back and watch Detroiters. Not born and raised, but did live there for a while.
Yeah.
So mine's actually a documentary. I promise not to make it documentaries every episode.
Get on nature.
Yeah, not everybody's cup of tea, but it had been on my watch list for a while, and I finally got around to watching the National Geographic Endurance program about Sir Edward Shackleton. Endurance, the book, which is sort of written novel, historical novel style, all of it factual, based on the journals from the men who got trapped in the ice and survived with the ship Endurance with the trip to Antarctica. It's just this massive story of endurance, of resilience, of problem solving, of decision making. Really, I mean, to me, it was a page turner. I was just engrossed in the story. So loved the book many, many years ago. And this was a documentary that is sort of in parallel paths documented Shackleton's expedition and that story with the search for his ship. So they kind of bounced back and forth between these two stories. And they were looking for the lost sunken ship Endurance with all the modern technology and everything else. So it was well done. It was great back and forths between the two things, two storylines, and added enough drama into it because they're looking for the ship and risk the same get stuck in the ice problem with a little more degrees of freedom to not have massive problems, but still very serious work in the ocean. So I really enjoyed that. I wasn't sure if I was going to, but because you never know with a documentary, but really, really enjoyed it. So I don't know, may go back and read the book one of these days. It's been a few decades, I think, since I read it.
Okay. Well, cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yep. So that's my share. And we will, like I said, it won't be a documentary next time. Next time we'll move on to something other than a red eye. I don't think I'll need another one of these today. I think I'm done with my caffeine intake.
Not quite feeling like, was it Beavis or Butthead who drank too much coffee and got all wired up in an episode of Beavis and Butthead?
Don't want to end up like that. But at risk of not, moderating myself by not knowing how much caffeine was actually in there, I'm probably done for the day.
Okay.
Maybe some tea, and won't end up in the jittery space. So
yeah. Well, a similar reason why we limited the amount of whiskey we would drink during lean whiskey, not to get jittery, but we weren't doing drunk lean.
It was not drunk history. So no. We were sipping, which was how I would normally drink anyway. So
responsible tasting, whether it's whiskey or coffee, that's the overall theme.
It's the overall theme. Little less risk on the coffee side, but
yeah. All right. Well, thanks as always, Jamie.
Thank you. Until next time, be well.
All right. You too.